Welcome in those investors. Do I have an exciting interview for you here today? I had the opportunity to have a conversation with one of the founding stewards of Valley DAO. His name is Albert, and man, does this guy know a lot about synthetic biology and how it might pertain to the future of the entire planet's climate. This conversation varied everything from the ticker symbol GROW, which is the coin associated with the DAO, Valley DAO, all the way to the potential for bacteria that could replace the concrete in skyscrapers. And don't you worry, towards the end of this video, I confronted him about that nasty synthetic meat that everyone's talking about. We're gonna get to the bottom of this and so much more. As you know, time's your most valuable asset, so let's get straight into it.
Welcome everyone to the first PS Crypto interview, I guess. So I feel honored to be the first one. Like me and you, we talked before the madness of this week. So you've been a supporter of us before the DeFi madness that happened on social media. So really appreciate that.
Day one supporter, baby. Let's go.
Day one supporter. Exactly. So I'm gonna, present a little bit about Valley DAO, myself, what we do, what we want to accomplish. And Patrick, feel free to interrupt me at any point and just ask questions about the stuff I say. And yeah, let's get into it. So, okay, let's see. So my name is Albert Anis. I come primarily from an academic background, having studied at Lund University. During my studies, I worked on cyanobacteria. It's kind of like an algae. And I was working on optimizing a couple of proteins in its metabolism to make it pick up carbon dioxide much more efficiently. After graduating, I started to work for the world's biggest synthetic biology organization called iGEM. What iGEM does is they host a competition for students in synthetic biology. So students work for a whole year. They put together a team at their university and they work on solving different problems using synthetic biology. Then they travel to Paris and then they compete with other teams. So I work with them in developing their entrepreneurial ecosystem because we saw that there was a lot of opportunities for these student teams to become startups, and we wanted to create kind of like a community and entrepreneurial resources for them.
I had just seen something on your X account for Valley DAO. I just saw something like a month or so ago. Did iGEM just host one of the more recent competitions or ventures? Did you guys participate as Valley DAO or have any integration there?
Yeah, so we didn't participate as a competitor, as a team. We got the opportunity to host a booth. So we sponsored the event and met with the different students and yeah, spread the gospel of DeFi and Valley DAO, basically.
Were you guys the only decentralized science booth there, or did you see other competition there?
Nope. That we were the only ones. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. I mean, and the cool thing with iGEM is they have been in the spirit of DeFi for a very long time. They've been around for 15 years, and iGEM is all about sharing, open source, open access, building upon the previous accomplishment of others. And yeah, so it's really in alignment with the decentralized science ethos, essentially. But just to finish up here, after working at iGEM, I started working as a venture builder at the Novo Nordisk funded Bioinnovation Institute, which is an incubator program for early stage to mid stage startups in biotech, industrial biotech. And there I got to work with around 30 different companies and academics, helping them and commercializing their research. So that's briefly about myself. So what is Valley DAO? So at its core, Valley DAO is a community of researchers, entrepreneurs, and other distinct professionals, all working together to collectively fund, govern, and develop technologies that uses biology to solve climate challenges, right? So I'm going to go through, in detail, what we do. But before that, let's actually talk a little bit about biology and how we look at it. So first of all, you're all made up of cells. All biological materials, all biological organisms, humans, plants, animals, bacteria are all made out of cells. In each cell, there is something called the DNA. This is essentially the language of life. So based on the DNA, that decides the function and the characteristics of a cell, which then builds up all biological organisms. And this can also be seen as the language of life. And if it's a language, that also means that it can be programmed. So one way to look at it as well is that if it is programmable, that means that we can introduce new genetic variations into these different types of cells and make them do things that they didn't do before. And what synthetic biology is all about is that how can we make these organisms, how can we modify these organisms to have them produce things that are useful for us? So this can be foods, bioplastics that are degradable, construction materials like cement, for example. There are companies doing that. They capture CO2 and they convert that into cement. So much more environmentally better process. We can make fuels.
Just so we're clear, because I know a lot of this stuff is like a very high level overview of what's going on, and it's complicated stuff, which is why I think it's hard for the narrative of decentralized science to really catch on. For the audience, if I'm catching that correctly, you're saying that you could program a bacteria cell or program an organism to produce cement. Could you kind of like touch on that a little bit more? How would it be possible to kind of program a living organism to create something it naturally might not create or not create a lot of?
Yes, that's a great question. So there are organisms out there in nature that do this naturally. They don't, do it like they don't just like produce the cement just like that. But if you
That'd be a tough
if you
life.
put them in if you put them in the right environment, they start essentially calcifying their environment and start building like this calcium based mass that is very hard and that resembles the properties of cement. So one company called Biomason, they've basically taken this strain from the wild, modified it, improved its ability to do that exact trait. So it's not always about introducing new traits. Sometimes it can be about amplifying existing traits that various bacteria or yeast already do. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so basically like a tree is able to grow and make bark and make all the ingredients of a tree, you could get this biological life to kind of grow into a calcified or something similar to cement structure. And similar to how a tree grows, this calcified structure, the cement building, might emerge from a living organism.
Exactly. And the cool thing is that this organism can pick up carbon-based substrates, so carbon-based things that it perceives as food, and removes that from the environment. So and turns that into cement. So you have essentially a carbon negative process. If you compare that to a traditional process of producing cement, there you use oil, you use super high temperatures, so that releases heat, but also releases a bunch of carbon dioxide, which increases global warming. So yeah, a lot of focus is on how to create better environmental processes. Let me just quickly go to the next one. So not only can we program biology, but biology can grow on renewable/organic matter. Some examples could be like carbon dioxide, so converting carbon dioxide, growing on that, using that as food to multiply itself, right? Like we know that cells multiply, and that's why humans are humans and plants are like plants. We just like keep on multiplying the number of cells until we become the final structure. In this case, the cells are multiplying in a steel reactor that you put in water, nutrients, and the feedstock, and then it multiplies and it produces your product. So whether that is the food, the nutrient, the bioplastic, and so on. And then you essentially just harvest that. You purify it, you remove all the genetical components, and in the end, you have essentially the pure product that you can form into a plastic or into a food, and so on. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's very fascinating that like we've progressed so far in such a short period of time from discovering DNA to now being able to program it just like you would a computer language. So it's really cool.
It's really fascinating indeed. And there are many SynBio companies out there applying this in many different ways. So as I mentioned before, Biomason, using this special organism to produce bioconcrete. We have Pivot Bio that takes microorganisms that are beneficial for the soil, multiply those, and actually puts them back into the soil to make the existing soil bacteria take up more nutrients, more nitrogen. And in this way, you don't have to use synthetic fertilizer. You can just use this solution. And then, of course, we have LanzaTech, which is a really interesting company. So same here, they take carbon dioxide from the waste stream of an industrial plant, convert that through microorganisms into fuels, into aviation fuel, into bioplastics that they can then make turn into clothing and so on. And it is expected like by 2030, 2035, that this could potentially grow into a $3.4 trillion industry, given the demand for more sustainable solutions, the increased taxation of carbon emissions. So the existing big industry is really like looking into solutions like this to decrease their emissions, and not having to pay that many taxes, right?
I think this slide specifically speaks to me a lot, and I know that the audience will appreciate this because if you actually look at the 6 different sectors here, or specifically the companies that would make up kind of the key synthetic biology division right now, only one of them is meat. Only one of them is that synthetic chicken or beef that everyone is freaking out online about. The rest of them are things that we will never put inside our bodies. I mean, unless you're going to eat biomason, go eat calcified cement buildings, or go drink some synthetically generated fuel. But that's not going to happen. It's just able to kind of sequester carbon out of the atmosphere. It's able to literally be carbon negative on all procedures around the world. So I think this slide, really people should study this and look further down this rabbit hole because you're only getting 1/6 of the industry when you look at the food sector, the synthetic biology as it pertains to food. So I just want to make sure everyone in the audience has a note of that.
Exactly. It always comes down to the things that we put in our mouths that, we fear the most when it comes from this type of industry. The thing is, if you actually look at Meatable's product, in the end, it's more or less the same thing as the actual thing, because when you do cultivated meat, you take a sample from the animal, like a sample that doesn't kill the animal. You don't have to kill the animal or anything. You take those cells, you put it in a steel reactor. You have a scaffolding of some sort so that the cells grow into the beef patty or the shape that you want it to. Once that process is complete, you essentially have a 1-to-1 chemical replica of the actual thing, because you're just growing the same cells that you took from a chicken. You're basically recreating the environment of a muscle cell in an animal, but in a lab. So I understand there's like a lot of worry about GMOs, and like if you eat synthetic beef, you're gonna get the genes of the synthetic beef, in your body, and you're gonna become into like an alien or something. That is not the case. This has been a long-lasting fear, amplified by certain narratives that doesn't really understand the full science and what it actually is. But yeah, we can talk all day about this.
I know. I think briefly I should say something because I do have a video there on the discovery of immortal cells that like went very viral, and I was playing into the fear-mongering side of that in order to get people to like pay attention to what's going on there. It's like it's so much more complicated than can be conveyed in a 1 minute long TikTok, but I want to keep going into Valley DAO. If you guys appreciate this style of content, if you appreciate the amount of alpha that we're getting already this deep into it, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, and go follow Valley DAO. We'll get into the self-shilling down the line a little bit. Let's go to the next slides you got prepared for us.
Let's go. So we believe that synthetic biology is key to unlock the future where humans essentially stop working against nature by using polluting methods to sustain ourselves, essentially. Like we know animal agriculture, the use of oil for energy and chemicals production, they're the two most polluting industries in the world. And we need to find alternatives where that allows us to transition away from this. Otherwise, like, I don't think we're going to make it. With synthetic biology, we, in a way, flip the script. We flip this dynamic and look for existing solutions in nature to work with nature in a way that is in harmony with it, right? So this sounds, a little bit woo-woo hippie-esque, but this is all found in real science. And I think there's definitely something with this whole philosophy of like, look at what nature is already doing and see, what can we learn from that? Because like, if we remove humans from existence, nature is a self-preserving system. Like it creates its own nutrients, it takes care of its own waste. It doesn't need an external input besides the sun. So a lot of the problems, with pollution, we can find solutions for that in nature. But it's also, we're approaching or expect to approach a population of 10 billion people. So imagine now you have 8 billion people and we're polluting to the extent that we are now. Imagine when you add an additional 2 billion. And, with time, more and more people will actually be lifted out of poverty. More people will start driving cars, and there's going to be even more and more pollution. And like electric vehicles, they're not going to solve this problem really, because we don't have enough ores to give everybody an electric vehicle. So we need to start thinking about ways of manufacturing things in a more sustainable manner. And synthetic biology, we believe, holds the key to many of these problems.
A lot of this stuff is going to look very different than the traditional drilling for oil. We might just have a vat of bacteria that secretes oil. So I think it just is hard for people to wrap their head completely around the framework change that's likely going to take place over the next 10 to 20 years.
Yeah, exactly. Now, the big question is, why isn't this already out there? Like, why isn't there mass adoption? And the answer is really these technologies are very difficult to develop. And they're very difficult to make cost efficiently as well. So the reason why you don't have synthetic meat in the stores, it's not only because of regulatory issues, it's also pricing. It's very hard to produce it in a cost-efficient manner today, but it's progressively, decreasing by tenfolds every 3 or 4 years. But the thing is with SynBio innovations is that they all stem from academia. But if you're in the lab and you want to develop something, you're going to have to apply for funding. But the problem is the current funding system is super slow. It's very efficient. You spend almost 50% of your time writing grants, trying to look for funding for your research. So this slows down innovation as a whole because, researchers, they get a lot of ideas sometimes, but if they're not able to raise fast enough, somebody else might, out-invent them or get there before they do. So there should be a mechanism of some sort that allows researchers to apply for funding in a much faster manner. The second thing is that academics, they are trained to, be in the lab, develop the technology, to understand the technology, to develop it and so on, but they're not trained in commercializing it. So right now there is a huge commercial gap, from things going from academia to industry, because academics are not trained to think about how to apply them in a real world setting. And then finally, there's really no collaboration incentives. So, that's one of the things that we are trying to solve through Valley DAO. So there's no platform or scalable framework for co-developing a technology. So if you're in a company if you're part of a startup, let's say, you're incentivized to develop that because you are part of that group and the upside is there for you. But you have no incentive to collaborate on this technology with other companies, for example. And the same thing in an academic setting. If you do that, you run the risk of, what if they publish before you do? What if they, steal your data? Yeah, there's a lot of this dynamic going on that limits collaboration in many different ways. And these are like the three main problems that we see that are slowing down the industry as a whole. So in the next couple of slides, I'm going to run through how we're solving them using the DAO framework, using this new funding mechanism, how we use IP NFTs, and so on. So how do we solve funding? So one thing to know, as I mentioned before, if you look at funding from a perspective of how mature a technology is, the more, at the beginning, when there is like no foundations set, it's just a hypothesis, there's a lot of funding for that type of research. And the main funder of this type of research are governments. So governments are incentivized by academics generating publications, and academics are incentivized by generating publications. And to generate a publication, you need to have something new and inventive. So academics take this funding, they invent something, they publish, but as soon as they publish, there is really no additional incentive to actually continue developing this technology. So as you can see here, in the middle, what we call the translational gap, that's the place when there is no incentive to fund it because, as I said before, it's already been published. As you go further down the line to the right, as the technology matures, the amount of available funding goes up again. And the main funders here is venture capital. Now, if you're stuck in here in the middle, venture capital is going to tell you, yeah, you're too early, like we don't want to fund you, this is too risky for us. So there is this kind of like, some people call it the valley of death, where it's just stuck in the lab, like nothing is happening with it. And that's exactly where we want to, that's exactly where we want to come in. So essentially what we've done is like we've used the DAO framework, we've issued a token, and we've sold that token we've built up a community and sold that token to them in return for funding that they now control. So everybody, like through the token, received essentially a digital receipt that gives them a vote in which research projects we fund and what we do with the resulting intellectual property once it goes out there. And this goes right into at the translational gap. And why it's interesting to fund research that is there is because this type of research has generated a proof of concept already. And usually it just requires like an additional injection of capital, maybe like $100,000 to $200,000. That's enough to cover the salary of a 2-year for a researcher for 2 years. And during that time, they can develop the technology further to make it eligible for venture capital funding.
It's even better too, because having a DAO fund that kind of transitionary period, that transitional gap, means that they don't have like a corporate overlord just making sure that they are gearing all of the research towards generating a profit. I mean, ideally, we are uncovering something that can be profitable later. And we know like profits, making money off of something is just a byproduct of solving a huge problem. So it's nice to see, though, that you guys are fulfilling that gap in the market where it's so necessary. Because, like you said, the researchers will spend 50% of their entire career just begging people for money. And it doesn't necessarily have to be like that.
Yeah, it slows down innovation as a whole, as mentioned before. What's cool with a DAO is that our DAO, it consists of other researchers and other entrepreneurs who have deep technological experience, but also experience in commercializing synthetic biology technologies. So before the researcher actually goes into the lab, after having received funding from us, we give them inputs, give them feedbacks on their research proposal, right? So, many of the times the researcher, doesn't really think about the commercial application. That's where we can come in and say like, hey, these are the metrics that you need to hit to be eligible for this thing to actually be venture scale. Because there's a lot of research.
You're saying the
Yeah.
researcher is not the entrepreneur who's going to make it into a company? That's
They can't.
crazy.
No, but we actually encourage them to be that entrepreneur, like to eventually leave academia to do it. But not all researchers are incentive. Not all researchers want to do that. And I think that's where, it makes sense for a community to be there, because we can inherit the intellectual property and commercialize it on our own instead of just having it sit there at the university, right?
Yeah, pick up the ball and run it past the finish line.
Exactly, exactly. Um, how do we solve commercial coordination? Like, how do we, the thing we were just talking about, like, how do we commercialize the technologies that come out in a much more efficient way? Once again, we leverage the community. So once a research project is funded and the researcher has gone into the lab and started working, maybe after 1.5 years, they've developed a piece of intellectual property where, it's ready to be commercialized. That's when the community can come in, people who are interested in this particular project and contribute with their time, with their network, with their resources, and earn tokens. And this is something that we've managed to really pull off. If I can say so myself, having gone from, when we started out mid last year, having only been 6 people, now we're 35 active people doing this exact thing, all incentivized by Grow, right? And what we've also seen is that things roll much faster. A lot of the entrepreneurial journey is about getting in touch with people that can unlock doors for you. So if you have this community network, each individual have their network as well. We can get hold of various industrial partners, follow-on investors, subject matter experts that can quickly, tell us if we're, going in the right direction or not. So this is really interesting, because like, if in a DAO, everybody is aligned under the same principle, which is like the token or the mission of the DAO, right? So everybody's like really working together on this one, IP asset or several IP assets. Currently, we only have one, but at some point we're going to have several. But this is also going to scale with the size of the community. So at some point, maybe we have 10 people working on one IP asset and really, trying to pull it all the way to the finish line.
Which will be good overall for the treasury in the DAO, right? Because that IP hopefully generates some revenue for the treasury. Now, as far as I just want to touch on the Grow token for a minute, because I know that people, even though we love the technology, people love making money too.
We have I have a slide on the token itself. So if you want, we can save it for then, or we
Yeah,
can
yeah. No, well, let's
go
wait
for
then.
it. Let's do that. So how do we how do we promote collaboration incentives? Like, how do we get people to actually align on a certain cause? I mentioned the Grow token before. That is one way, but I think what's really interesting is the IP-NFT framework developed by Molecule, which we are actively using and which you also made a video on. So maybe you can drop a link to it somewhere in the video, but
Yeah, I'll tag it.
do it. How it works is that when Valley DAO funds a project at a university, we get a license from that university, a physical signed contract. That contract, we can put that on chain. Once it's on chain in the form of an NFT, it can be much more efficiently transacted. It can be governed as an on-chain assets by a decentralized community. This is something that we haven't really seen before. We've never seen a global collective of some sort, together deciding how a piece of intellectual property is going to be used, how it's commercialized, and so on. So token holders, they're governing a portfolio of different IP assets. And when you have that type of dynamic, everybody's aligned on like progressing those IP assets, because people have a governance right, like they're empowered, which I find really interesting. And now the other aspect, like the thing is with on-chain assets, what you can do is you can fractionalize these assets, right? And this is, what you have to the left here is like a Molecule calls it an IP NFT. What you have on the right is an IP token, intellectual property token, or tokens. Each fraction is a individual token. How it usually works is that once an IP NFT is formed and it has generated IP rights that are attached to the IP NFT, And for example, let's say you want to raise additional funding for this research because the original IP NFT work was like quite promising. You can fractionalize it and sell additional fractions of that IP to investors. But you can also distribute it to people who contribute directly to that IP, so they can receive fractions in individual projects to kind of like as a way for them to double down on particular IP assets in the portfolio that they're really bullish on, for example.
These IP tokens, so not the thing on the left, not the non-fungible token, but the fungible one where you can divide it into as many as you'd like. Each one of these, I'm assuming, would retain some value, correct? So if somebody wanted to invest into the idea that was generated from the research that was funded, they would be able to buy into one of these tokens.
Yeah, so these tokens essentially work like any ERC20 token. So you can actively trade in and out from them. And what we want to do is we want to set up a pool where you can, if you hold grow, you can exchange that grow for these types of fractions. So this creates like additional utility for the main governance token. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, that was perfect.
Awesome. So just to wrap this up real quick on this particular slide, you know, the way I like to put it is like empowering people to, you know, take action and govern a collective IP portfolio of technologies that can have a real world impact. I think that's super fascinating. And it seems to be working. Like it's, you know, people have tried to solve this type of problem in the past with like IP pools, IP commons, where, you know, you have different companies pulling together their IP, and whatever is in that pool, anybody of those companies can use. But what's always ended up happening is that companies put in the least valuable IP in that pool. So eventually it's just like collapsed, and like no innovation in these types of collaboration structure has happened until now, until the creation of the IP NFT in combination with like DAOs and the Web3 ecosystem. So how do we sustain this activity, right? When we fund a project, we receive a stake in the IP, right? That becomes governed by the community. Once we have the IP, our goal is to commercialize it, to bring it to market using the community, using the network, using the pooled resources and the knowledge, right? Into either licensing it to industry. So if they want this technology, they can receive a sub-license, and Valley DAO can receive like royalties on sales that uses that IP. But more interestingly, we can create our own companies within the DAO. So we can incubate the IP. We can use the DAO network to source, you know, potential founders, you know, individuals who wants to take up the C-suite position. So the CEO, the CSO, the COO. We can help those individuals with developing a business plan, and we can help them with raising additional funding. And then Valley DAO, you know, holds equity in that company. So when that company, you know, if that company is successful, it gets acquired or IPOs, Valley DAO receives some of those proceeds back to ultimately continue this flywheel of funding more research, building out the community, and so on.
Now, I have two questions for you. One of them is going to be kind of difficult, so I'm just giving you a little bit of a heads up here. It kind of seems like an attack or some FUD, people would say, but one of the main arguments against a DAO that I've heard, and I want to just hear your opinion on it as well, is that the people who are behind the DAO are more so just giving the members of the DAO the illusion of choice. What do I mean by that? You said, for example, they want to take part of the IP, that they want to take a company public, and the DAO gets to choose on if they go public, rather than giving them the choice of, do we take this company public or do we stay private with the company? It would be, we've decided we're going to go public with the company. Do you want to do an IPO, a direct listing, an IDO, like that kind of illusion of choice, where they've already decided that we're going to go public. now you as the DAO get to decide what the route would be. Is that something that you've thought of, you guys have addressed before? Is this
So one thing to have in mind is that so let's say we have an IP asset that was funded by the Valley DAO community, right? And then we have a governance proposal that says, hey, we want to turn this into a startup. Here are the seed team people. Here's the commercial strategy. And then the community votes on that. Once that is approved, the license of the IP gets sub-licensed to that company. And then that company becomes an independent entity from the DAO. So at that point, the community doesn't really have an influence in the trajectory of that company. But this is also a good thing because you can't really have a community, a DAO community involved in a startup and continuously trying to influence the direction and so on. It's just like not efficient. I think the strength of a DAO is like in the early, in the early stages of a technology to inject capital, figuring out like the best commercial strategy, and then passing it over, right?
Yeah, they're just more managing the funds. I guess a better way to put it would be like, would the proposals be, we've already decided we're gonna fund this one research initiative, and then the DAO members get to pick how much money or who the money exactly is going to, rather than like, should we fund this research or not? Do you know what I'm asking with that?
Yes. So usually the researcher makes a proposal and say like, hey, this is how much money I'm going to need. These are the milestones. The community can give feedback on that. The researcher can integrate that feedback, update the proposal, and then finally the community, decides if we fund this or not.
Beautiful.
Okay.
And that actually segues perfectly into the second topic, and that is the clear distinction between some of these DAO tokens, so Grow being a security or not. And I just want to make it known for the audience that the key distinction here is that the people who own the Grow token, the token that is associated with voting and governance for the DAO, don't actually have any rights to the money that's in the treasury. They have rights to dictate what happens to that money, but it's not theirs. Therefore, it's not labeled as a security. And I guess a lot of this is still up in the air from the SEC, specifically United States. I'm talking here because they could come around and say whatever they want. But currently speaking, from the framework we have, that clear distinction where they're not entitled to any of the money in the treasury is what separates this from being an unregistered security.
Exactly, and that's and thank you for bringing that up and mentioning it. It's a pretty big misconception as well. One thing to have in mind is that let's say there is an exit case and an IP asset turns into $1 billion company, right? If you contributed with your time and your effort to the development of that IP asset at some point in time, you have rights to the dividends of that because you've contributed with your time. Your payout is not dependent on the efforts of others in this case. But if you're just a token holder, yeah, like you cannot get the dividends of that. I mean, not at least not yet, and until we have a much more clearer regulatory environment, we cannot make these promises. So
yeah, we're at the mercy of the SEC, but I'm excited. What is the first NFT, the IP NFT that you guys have funded? I'm very excited to talk about this thing.
Yeah. So let's do that. So the first IP NFT was funded with at Imperial College London. Imperial College London is the leading synthetic biology university in the world. It's up there, amongst like MIT and Stanford and Harvard, definitely. What this focuses on is it uses a special type of yeast that is really efficient at producing fatty acids. Okay. Fatty acids, like you can imagine the applications, like everything from fuels, cosmetics, foods, you name it. Like there's so many different applications to this. So what this project focuses on is improving that yeast to produce a wide variety of these fatty acids to be applied in the different application areas that I just brought up. One big application area is like the palm oil industry. So maybe, as you know, palm oil currently, it's extremely polluting, industry, but it's also like a very anti-ethical industry because you're taking away the habitation of the orangutans. So that's why we had this image here of an orangutan working together with the human to, to symbolize the making peace with this problem, basically.
I love that.
But yeah, this is the IP NFT. It's on chain. You can find it. Here's the address. This is the owner. This is the description. This is the lead researcher, Rodrigo. And to this, we've actually recruited a postdoc that is going to work together with Rodrigo. And he's worked with this yeast in the past at both in Berkeley, but also at Chalmers, and both of these universities are really known for their synthetic biology research. So we're super excited to partner up with them and see where we can take this project.
Now, you said fatty acids. For the audience, is that specific to just food? Is that, I see a perfume commercial continuing around in the corner there. What exactly, just briefly, you don't have to go in depth, but what are fatty acids?
They're fats, they're fats, they're oils, omega-3, like that's a fatty acid, for example. They're really important chemicals in a wide range of different day-to-day applications. So with the cosmetics, certain creams are made up of this type of fat, or like a fat, which gives it its like moisturizing capabilities, right? Some of these fats today are actually derived from like sharks or like other animals. So this is a big problem, of course. With synthetic biology, you can produce all of these ingredients that you need for different products in the lab without hurting any animals, with much more less emissions, less electricity, and so on. And the cool thing, you can do it anywhere in the world where you have access to steel, water, sugar, and electricity. So if this works out, we don't need to import palm oil from half across the globe to get it to us. We can produce it at site, cut the travel distance, and save the orangutans, of course.
Let's go.
That's the first project.
Let's save the orangutans.
Let's do it. This second project is with Denmark's Technical University. What they're doing is that they're developing high-performance biomaterials. You've maybe heard about forever chemicals like PFAS, like Teflon. These are like super crucial materials. Like we need those materials, for things like electrical conductors in the aviation industry, for
lining plastic bottles and the non-stick
all kinds of
pans
things
when you're cooking. Those things are everywhere.
They're everywhere. So what this company is doing is that they're producing them in a much more sustainable manner, and they're creating alternatives for these materials that are not toxic for the environment. Okay, that's why we're super excited about this, because it's like an application that no other synthetic biology startup out there has ever tried pursuing. And let me tell you about the story of this spin out. So we actually approached them originally to fund their research, but what we discovered when we spoke with the lead professor, Pablo Ivan Miquel, was that they had already filed IP, like they already had a patent and everything, but nothing was really happening to it. There was like I think it all came down to, the researchers not having time, nothing there to really like catalyze the commercial activity for them. So we looked at the technology, we reviewed it with some other people in the community who have commercial experience, who've worked in this industry in the past, and together with the researcher and Valley DAO, we developed a commercial plan, a business plan We helped them recruit key people. We mentored the academics like that later turned to become the founders of the startup, and eventually we helped them fundraise $600,000. So now they're at one of the top incubator programs in Denmark, commercializing this piece of work, and this happened within 6 months. So I don't think that this would have been possible without our support. I think this could potentially, just still have been at the and the on the shelf of the lab, not really having any benefit to the world.
Yeah, that speaks back to slide number 9 when you were solving the funding issue where they had gotten maybe the initial grant to discover this material, but now they were hunting down how they could have turned this into something that venture capitalists would have enjoyed investing into, and thus enter Valley DAO to fill that Valley gap. I love that. That's actually a really cool story.
Yeah, awesome. I'm glad just quickly about the community, like the community is everything in this. It's the life force of Valley DAO, really. And we have different kinds of people. So as I said earlier on, it consists of like academics, people from industry, other investors, students even. And yeah, it's a nice environment for professionals of different kinds to be involved and like just help each other out, contribute to the mission. Of course, we have also Web3 people also involved in this, helping out with building out like the product, working on tokenomics, working on governance. So it's a nice little intersection of academics and industry people, like from the bio side, and like the degens from Web3. They're not all degens, but degen is not a bad word, right? Like degen is like if you're a degen, like it's a respected thing.
Yeah, in order to be in crypto, you got to have a little bit of degen inside of you. There's no way around that.
Exactly. Let me quickly go over up and coming research projects. So I've actually censored out the images of the researchers because these are not official. These are in the process. They are being reviewed, discussed with the researchers and so on. So we have one project potentially with NASA, looking at space applications for synthetic biology, with synthetic biology. So when you go up in space, you have limited amount of things you can bring with you, right? But these microorganisms, they're like at the nano, like they're at the micro scale.
Mm-hmm.
So you can program a microorganism or a different set of microorganisms to produce pharmaceutical X, pharmaceutical Y, nutrient A, nutrient B, and so on. You would bring up this whole stack. So whenever you would need one of these things, you would take that organism and then you would multiply it, and then you would have your product. Does that make sense? So you don't have to carry all of these things because you don't know what you're going to need, and you don't want to end up bringing all of these things with you up there.
I actually have like a very, and I might end up cutting this because it makes me seem like a psychopath, but I have a very intricate conspiracy theory, if you will, that like we used to have advanced human civilization, which had figured out how to code in the world of like bioengineering and stuff. Basically this, just way more advanced, so they could have colonized the planet and had everything created through organic materials that then like when a cataclysm hit the earth, it wiped all that out, and that's why we don't find many traces of them aside from stone structures, because they had everything that they needed being created from biological things. So I love that so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but I mean, some people, it's a legit theory that life could have come from outer space, come here, through a meteor, and then it started populating and created all of the different organisms and so on.
It's crazy.
I mean, I think synthetic biology even has the potential to create microorganisms that can live on the surface of Mars.
Mm-hmm.
So you would send, a cargo of biological material there, have it crash on the surface, and then it would start consuming whatever is in the atmosphere and whatever it can find in the minerals of the planet, and start multiplying and terraforming the atmosphere and make it habitable.
Much safer than nuking the poles.
Yeah, that's an idea, right?
Yeah.
So we have another project with Stanford, looking at how can we prototype plants with improved features much faster? So how can we make plants that generate fruit that are more nutritious and so on, and that can also survive in really harsh conditions? So with the temperature increase, we're also getting drought, like things are drying up as well, and it makes, you know, agriculture in environments that are already warm, so like anything that is close to the equator, really, you know, makes it really, really difficult for them to grow plants. And then finally, a project with Harvard University looking at how can we convert CO2 and electrical energy from the sun into food in the most simple, you know, explanation there.
And now, how I know it's like difficult because each project is going to be very fundamentally different from the next, but how long from initial finding of this potential research to getting funded, and then subsequently, how long does the research usually last on average if somebody were to like expect a very brief timeline?
2.5 months.
From finding
Yeah.
till funding?
Exactly. And the thing that delays the process the most is the administrative process at the university. Like we can make decisions relatively fast from our side, but the inherently slow mechanisms at the university just delays things really.
And that's
So two and a
a
half.
sharp contrast. Like you're saying 10 weeks essentially, 2.5 months compared to the 10 months that it usually would take in a traditional system. So that's a very, very, in order of magnitude, less time.
Exactly. Yeah, that's really nice. Like for us, for the researchers, like we can get research funded in a much faster way. Let's talk about the token. Whoa. So of course, the Grow token is really the thing that powers the activity in the DAO. Now, of course, its main utility, the base utility is voting. So Grow gives you governance rights over how we use the different IP assets in the portfolio. So, you know, whether, you know, to what company we license them to, or if we decide to spin out our own company, under what conditions and so on. So this makes it a more inclusive process and, you know, giving people a say on how the different IP assets are used, which in contrast to like a DeFi DAO token where you would govern the yield rate or the emission rate and so on. But most of the times people don't really care. Like if you're a token holder there, you don't even know that these things are going on, right?
Right.
But in the case of Valley DAO, like the majority of our token holders are other academics that understands these IP assets, and they can make like really high quality contributions and decisions on it. Second thing is a stake in IP NFTs. So as I mentioned before, once an IP NFT matures and we want to turn it into an IP token, we can essentially leverage Grow. So Grow holders can take their Grow and convert it into this new token, which is a fraction in the actual IP itself, and receive much more focused governance rights. And like these IP token holders, they essentially form like a new mini DAO within the DAO, and they're more actively involved in developing that particular IP. Third thing is, of course, like incentives, just driving the activity, rewarding contributors for their time, you know, the different resources that they contribute, like if they make like a really valuable introduction, for example. And then finally, we're developing kind of like a meta coordination platform. So what we've discovered is that there are so many different bio communities out there, but they're very poorly managed due to the lack of incentives, due to the lack of like no clear facilitator in those communities. So what we want to do is like a platform that connects all of these things together, where researchers can be matched up with industry, where industry can find researchers to work with, startups to work with, where they can find like basically different opportunities. We want to create this platform and have integrate grow within that platform. So if you, let's take the introduction example again. So if you reward, or if you introduce somebody to somebody in your network, you can receive some grow for that. Whereas, let's say you want an introduction to a particular individual, like let's say an investor, you can create like a grow bounty, and whoever takes up that bounty and helps you with the introduction and helps you solve whatever problem that you might have, receives that bounty. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I really like it. I like the multiple use cases that are getting involved in with Grow here, the token, but I see it a lot across a lot of different decentralized science applications, which otherwise I have not seen across crypto at all or Web3. So that bounty thing specifically really gets me excited because you can contribute and you can grow the community and you can get together. We know humans, just biologically, we love community. And so like this incentivizes the acceleration of community.
Exactly. Yeah, and it puts a quantifiable value to things that currently doesn't have that, right?
Right.
So it's creating a new market. So once again, with the introduction, like we don't have an introductions market, right? So if you're somebody that has a really powerful network, this is a way for you to start monetizing that network, which could create some beneficial dynamic in a community. We'll have to see. Have to try it out. Let's go over the ecosystem growth. So since day one, we have been community owned. So no pre-sale of tokens, no sale of tokens at a discount to an investor before actually selling them to the community. And actually, when we had the Gnosis auction, there was no pre-allocation to the team. So there was an auction, and then that initial community voted on a governance proposal that would distribute the tokenomics to the team, the early community, the advisors, and so on.
I love that.
It's really important. It really is important. Also, from a regulatory perspective, like having a pre-mine in your project can put you, closer to being deemed as a security.
It's an immediate
also,
red flag for them. They like those fair launches are really, they've made it clear that you need to have a fair launch. So I'm happy that you guys did that.
Exactly. And this is also like big shout out to BioXYZ that gave us this legal support in the early days and helped us like really do things right from day zero. Through all of these different partners and the community, we've managed to raise just under $1 million to kind of like bootstrap the activities of the community, fund a couple of initial researchers, and try to get that flywheel going, basically. We got the chance to host a major event in Montenegro at Zuzalu. Some people know about Zuzalu. It was kind of like this pop-up city experiment in Montenegro where crypto, bio people, longevity people, SynBio people all met for like 2 months time, for a period of 2 months, and just, connected, worked on things, built things, hacked, had sharing circles, had debates. It was a really interesting experience, but we got the chance to host like a weekend-long event and managed to bring in people like Vitalik and other big profiles in the synthetic biology industry, such as Jason Kelly from Ginkgo Bioworks, Drew Endy, who is a professor at Stanford. He's one of like almost like the founder of synthetic biology, and this was the first time he was exposed to the world of blockchain, and he was like super excited about the energy and like the ethos of collaboration, something that he hasn't seen before in the SynBio industry.
I was just gonna ask, like, is Ginkgo Bioworks getting involved in this space now? Is that guy, I'm sure after witnessing such a strong community event, probably is interested in it. Are we seeing a lot of like mainstream bio companies like Ginkgo Bioworks getting involved?
Ginkgo hasn't gotten involved yet, but nothing is stopping us from potentially doing a project with them in the future. But it's still kind of like in the relationship building phase.
Mhm.
For a big company like this to get involved in DeFi, you need some level of like relationship building. But with these kinds of like that's the whole point with these events, right? To expose two different communities to each other that have never interacted before, can have ripple effects down the line. I think some people started collaborating on projects, so hopefully we'll start seeing like more cross-sectional like bio blockchain type of innovation in the future. We've been featured in different kind of like outlets and journals. So we were featured in Nature publications. We were featured in Forbes and Blockworks. These were not paid for. Our marketing budget has been zero. I can promise you that. But I think that this comes with just like the interest from incumbents, the blockchain industry, seeing the intersection of science and crypto, like a use case that had never been seen before. And the thing is, like, the more time people spend in DeFi, the more it's like, this actually makes sense. Like, blockchain is actually a relevant use case to solve various incentives and issues in academia and innovation. And then finally, just a quick metric on community growth, grown by quite significantly, like since we started back in Q2, like mid last year, from 8 people to 35 people. And I think Valley DAO is this whole journey has really been like it all started on Discords. It was like two people who like had an idea, started messaging like different Discord servers, like in the early DeFi days, Discord servers that are like don't exist anymore, even like deleted, have died. Eventually, we got a meeting together of different people that were interested, and then we put together a light paper, and then slowly, like grassroots style, started like aggregating people, aggregating incentives and willingness for people to build out this thing. And it's super awesome to see what it has become today.
Hi, it reminds me a lot of like the startup story of Facebook, where Mark Zuckerberg was in like his college dorm room coding all the time, or the startup story of Amazon, where he was Jeff Bezos was in his garage trying to put together a website. Like, this is just the decentralized version, and it happens to be that garages and dorm rooms are Discord and Telegrams. So it's pretty cool. I love.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, no, I love that too. There's definitely like a charm in that, but it also says a lot about the day and age that we live in today.
Yeah, it does.
um so that's pretty much it, man. Like if you're watching this, if you want to get involved in Valley DAO, if you like what we do, if you want to learn synthetic biology, maybe you've never been exposed to the subject before, go to validao.bio/community, get involved, apply as a contributor, or just come into the Discord and hang out with us. And yeah, we'll take it from there.
I will put all of the links in the description below. On your way down, make sure you like that video and subscribe. Definitely go check out what Valley DAO is doing. If you have questions about literally anything DeFi related, or even blockchain or biosynthetics, go to their Notion. Again, I'll put a link there. I was very, very impressed going through the Notion that you guys have put together. That's like a resource for literally anyone in Web3 or crypto. So 10 out of 10 on that. I have a
Thank you so much.
couple, yeah, a
Yeah,
couple
let's
questions
do it.
from people on the last video I made on YouTube. So if you want to go to the next slide you have here, and we can like chill on that slide while I ask a couple things. Crypto Dream for Us said all of it sounds great. I appreciate that they are putting in the needed research. I'm just not a fan of synthetic food. I love the clear line that they're making about not being a security, and that they have education on their site. So I think we touched on most of that right there. If you have, the reason I brought that one up first is because this right here are 3 different examples, only one of which involves food. The other 2 are very intricate. I really like the spider silk jeans one. I don't know if you guys have seen the little contraptions that they have created to get silk out of spiders. It's kind of cruel, kind of crazy. They just kind of like let a spider dangle in front of you. Um, and then the spider believes that if it makes a little bit more silk, it'll get to the ground and be safe. But you have a contraption that is like wheeling up the silk as it creates
Oh,
it.
that
So the
that's
spider's
brutal.
just dangling there in a perpetual state of like, I gotta make more silk. So I like that one, I really am a big fan of, and you don't have to eat it, right?
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, in this case, like you're not even doing that process to produce the silk. You're taking the genes that produces it. You cultivate it in brewer's yeast, like the same way that you brew beer. You grow that in a steel tank, and then you'll get like a bulk mass that you can thread out and reshape and turn into like some sort of textile.
Yeah, it's
But
it's
the
nice.
question with like with synthetic food is like, um, what does he even mean with synthetic food? Like, does he mean processed food? So assuming he means processed food, 99% of all food is processed in some way, but just because it's processed doesn't mean that it's going to kill you or hurt you in the long run. A lot of it depends on where you are, of course. Like in the Europe where I am, like food regulations are much more stricter, whereas in the US, it's just like not the same.
Yeah.
But like some preservatives, people hear the word preservative and they're like, oh shit, cancer, like right out. But some preservatives are like vitamin C, to not make the food rot. And vitamin C is like it's a vitamin.
Oh, you mean it's
Um,
citric acid? That stuff's
oh,
scary. Or
hydrogen
ascorbic
oxide.
acid. I think a lot
Um,
of it, and I made a video on it, so I kind of played into the fear mongering a little bit, but that was to draw attention to the entire space. It's like we took a character trait known as immortalization from a discovery from cancer. And so that initial like, oh shit, this is something that cancer cells have, therefore we're eating cancer. And I think that that's where a lot of the stigma comes for synthetic meat initially. It's obviously not the case, and you and I know that it comes from stem cells, and we just are altering the stem cells because they also have that character trait of immortalization when treated appropriately. But the main like attraction there is that there's a lot of research that still has to be done because eating something that you have genetically changed can potentially have an impact on your body. We just don't know yet because it's still so brand new. And Valley DAO and a lot of these other DeFi projects are funding the research that's going to allow us to determine and find that out. Do you have anything to add there? Am I incorrect on that assumption there?
um, the thing is, like, let's say you eat a genetically modified apple, okay? The moment it hits your stomach acid, it kills off all genetic components in that apple. Like it breaks them down. Um, I mean, I don't want to say I'm like 100% sure about this, but I'm like 99.9999% sure that it is impossible for a gene from an apple that you eat to go into the genes of your natural genes, like in your cells in your stomach lining. Um,
I'm,
however,
yeah, go ahead.
however, we should be cautious of engineering plants that are resistant to certain type of pest or bacteria or things that infect them. There, the risk is that it might start out competing everything else,
Mhm.
right? So in that way, like we have to be really cautious, and in that sense, I understand regulation. I understand the fear that regulators have, but also consumers have. However, modifying a plant to produce fruit that is more nutritious is different because you're not modifying the resistance characteristics of that plant. You're just modifying it in a way that it produces a fruit that is more nutritious. So that plant should technically not start out competing everything else that is around it. But the problem is, this falls under the same type of regulations, right? And that's kind of like a big obstacle, particularly in any type of genetically modified thing. that would go out in the environment. It's that fear. Now, one thing to add there is like, there is a way to engineer these organisms so that they have something called a kill switch, which works like this. The moment the organism is outside of its intended environment, there's a genetic circuit that is activated, similar to an AND gate in a computer. That thing gets activated and it kills the organism. So that if it goes out of its intended environment, maybe in the soil or into the wastewater, it dies off, and it can be like a difference in the concentration of salt or a difference in temperature and so on. So there are ways to do this safely, but the problem is, regulation, fear, but also Monsanto, who is today called Merck. No, not Merck. Bayer.
Yeah.
They changed their name.
Because Monsanto has a stigma behind it now.
Exactly. Monsanto was very active in the 70s and 80s. But the things they did, their business practices, having developed chemical warfare things to be used in chemical warfare, kind of like ruined biotechnology for everyone. Because like regulators came in and just like the same thing that happened to nuclear energy, right? So it's unfortunate, but things are improving both in Europe and in the US. So
yeah,
optimistic about
over time, the truth comes out. Over time, like you realize who the bad actors are, and hopefully they get taken out.
Thank you so much, Patrick. Like really, really appreciate this. Appreciate your content, and appreciate your support. So hope to, maybe come back one day. If we have like an exciting update or something, we can announce it through another one of those videos. Maybe not as long as this one.
A quick one. That was one of the most intense and information-packed videos that I think I have ever put out on this channel. Dare I even say that is one of the best videos on all of synthetic biology in the entire YouTube video catalog. Now, the purpose of my channel here, if you enjoyed that, please like and follow along, subscribe, because I have an objective of interviewing as many of the brightest individuals in the realm of decentralized science as I can. If that happens to be you or someone you know, please feel free to reach out, even just leave a comment down below and I'll do the reaching out, because I want to get those bright minds to as many people as possible. So thank you so much, Albert. I had a great time. Everyone make sure you go follow all his socials and join the community below. As you guys know, time is your most valuable asset. Hopefully this was worth investing into. I will see you guys in the next video.